Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we have a special occasion. It is now the anniversary of me owning the Chevrolet Corvette. This is a 1989, and wow, this thing has been a journey. Today, I'm going to tell you about the experiences and everything I've learned about this thing and all the things that I've replaced. And would I recommend buying one of these as your first classic American car? Let's get into it. Just like I said earlier in the video, today marks a year since I've owned this car. I bought this car in November of last year, 2023, and it has definitely been an experience. So first thing first, I'm going to tell you about my experience picking up the vehicle. So at first, I bought this car at the dealership. I don't want to tell you the name of it because the first part of this experience with this car wasn't very good. But my first experience was I went ahead and bought this car. I was trading in my 2014 Honda Civic Si for it because it was going to be a lot cheaper, a lot cheaper. And one thing they actually did for me is that they let me keep the Civic until I was actually ready to trade it in, because the Civic was my daily driver. Now I was going to make the Miata the daily driver, and I needed to get some work done to it first. I needed to get the timing belt replaced and the water pump replaced. I also needed to get the oil leaks fixed. But the Miata was pretty much out for about 2 months, and during those 2 months they let me drive the Civic. And then finally the day came when the Miata was ready, and I was ready to pick this thing up. And my first event my first experience was something else. So my first experience with this car was a doozy. Now, to be honest with you, I was completely freaked out about buying this car. I was trading a car that I knew will always start and has never given me any problems mechanically for pretty much a vehicle that I know nothing about. And this first experience definitely did not help. So, as I said, the dealership was allowing me to drive my Civic until I finally was ready to take delivery of this car. Now, I finally get done with everything I needed to do with the Miata, and I head over to the dealership in the Civic. I trade in the Civic, give them the keys and everything, and I'm getting ready to drive off. Now, I drive off in this thing, and as soon as I leave the dealership, this thing starts overheating really bad. I mean, 270 degrees, which is way too hot. And these engines are already known for running hot around like 220, 230 degrees, and that's normal. But when you see that red line in the thermostat gauge, you know it's bad. And so this pretty much starts the crazy journey with this thing. So the reason why this thing started overheating is because the coolant system on these C4 Corvettes is kind of weird. The coolant is kind of hard to burp correctly, it's hard to flush and everything. So I took it back to the dealership, and they pretty much got it back to where it wouldn't overheat anymore. But another problem that this thing had was that it had a low coolant light on there. Now, it wouldn't happen all the time. It was kind of like intermediate, but as it turns out, the dealership did it wrong, as I would find out later on. But other than that, the car was driving fine for about a month, and then finally, after a month of driving this thing, I was actually driving a lot at first, but I ended up having to replace the alternator. Yeah, so one day I was just driving the Corvette on the weekend, and I noticed that it started overcharging. Now, I'm not used to like alternators overcharging the system. Most of the time when they go bad, they don't put enough charge in the system. But as it turns out, the voltage regulator will go out on these old GM alternators, as I found out in the C4 forums. Now, I went ahead and replaced this alternator myself at home, and It was about 80 bucks off of Amazon. It's an AC Delco 105 amp unit, and that wasn't that bad to do. Pretty much removed this belt. This is not the stock bracket that holds these on. It's like way bigger. But take these bolts out and swap it back in, and after that, the alternator has pretty much been perfect ever since then. All right, so I'm about 2 or 3 months into this car, and then pretty much problems just start arising. I'm noticing that coolant is pretty much leaking out of the reservoir, and this was after the alternator was replaced. Coolant was leaking out the reservoir. I still had that little coolant light, so I decided to buy a new radiator cap and new coolant reservoir cap, and at the same time the distributor starts acting up. Now, I pretty much had a bad experience with this car, all because of that distributor right there. Not that one, that's a new one. And the dealership that I bought this car from did not help at all, which sucks because that's the main reason I bought this car, because the dealership said I could bring it in for service whenever it needed. And the dealership is only like 10-15 minutes away from where I live. But the car had a starting issue. It started getting harder and harder and harder to start until it wouldn't start anymore. The last time this car started with this original problem was at the dealership. I actually took it to the dealership, see what they can do with it. They said it was going to be over a week before I went. They said it was going to be like a week before they can look at it. Now, about 2 weeks later, I call them. The car's pretty much been sitting at the dealership for 2 weeks since then. I call them, and they pretty much give me the runaround. They didn't want to work on this thing. They lied to me for me to buy it, to be honest with you. But they said that the car was starting normally. They had moved it, but they said it was starting normally. It was supposed to start like that. But, I mean, if you guys have been watching the channel for a while, you know that this thing was not starting. Now, I'm pretty mad at this point. I'll go back to the dealership, barely get it started. I was actually really lucky that I got it started. And then I took it back home. That weekend, I called my buddy. By the way, I will shout his place out. Big Keki, that's what the name of his shop is, and they do really good work. They are the only people who touch this car other than me, and they've really done good by me. But I get ready to start this thing because I needed to drive it over there, and it's like a 48-50 minute drive over there. So I'm just getting ready and hoping everything goes well, because usually once this car started, I was pretty much good. It just drove normally, surprisingly, with the problems that I found out about this thing. But I go ahead and try to start it. Nothing. I even made a video of me trying to start it, and I did get a bunch of video comments about that. I take it to the I couldn't get it started. I had my buddy tow it over there, and he replaces the distributor cap. Great. This thing is starting now. It's like awesome. This distributor is finally starting now. Everything is all good. I'm just driving it. I'm driving it more often. I'm just really enjoying this thing. And then disaster strikes yet again. And this was pretty much the lowest point I've ever been with this car. So I freaking was driving back home from work, going on the highway in the middle lane about 70 miles per hour, and it just stops running just in the middle of traffic. Now I was able to move off to the shoulder, and actually one of my coworkers spotted me, and we were able to find out that the car wasn't getting any spark anymore. Great. Just replaced the distributor cap and pretty much found out that it was done for. Had it towed back to the shop, and guess what? The freaking ignition coil is burnt out, and it actually could have caused this thing to catch on fire, which at the time of when it happened, I actually wish it did back then. I wanted to be rid of this thing so bad. It was causing me such a headache at the time. But things are a lot better now. But I even made a video saying that I wanted to sell this thing. I wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But the ignition control module was the culprit. We get a new distributor in, and guess what? There's something else going on with the car. It has an electrical issue. But we ended up finding out what it was, and it turned out to be the ignition control module. Now he replaces that, and the car is pretty much running good again. The car was pretty much at the shop for about 2 months. It really felt like I didn't even have this, I didn't own this car anymore. It really just felt like the car was more of a distant memory at the time. And that was the darkest point of this car. I was really thinking about selling it whenever I got it back, but I started driving it again, and I pretty much fell in love with it. So after all of that, all the ignition problems, all of the coolant problems I've had with this car, my buddy actually ended up flushing the coolant and putting all that new parts that I put in there on the car while it was at the shop, and it's pretty much been perfect ever since. But this car, ever since all that work has been done to it, $2,000 later, I've had no problems out of it ever since. This thing has pretty much been dead reliable, started every time, and has not given me any problems. The last thing I've ever had to do to this car, and it was my fault, was replace the gas pedal, and I broke it showboating. Now, I never knew that a car's gas pedal can break until, well, a few months ago, and yeah, that was my fault. It's crazy, these cars, in all honesty. But I replaced the gas pedal. I actually went and took it to the shop so they can readjust the distributor, because the car would kind of like buck and misfire on certain RPMs. But that's pretty much fixed, and the car's pretty much been driving great ever since. This car has really been one of the most fun cars I've had in a long time. The only car that I can probably say I've enjoyed more than this car is the Miata, of course. I mean, the Miata is a car I've always wanted in the first place, and this car is pretty much tied with the Abarth for being my second favorite car. This thing is really something special. It gets a lot of attention. It's cheap to run. Well, gas isn't cheap, but maintenance is pretty cheap. At least the parts are. But this thing's been great. I put about 4,000 miles on it, and I've had a lot of fun with this thing. And it pretty much starts up with no issue.